Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm here with my co-host, Zach Gerber, and a very good friend of mine who has been instrumental in Take Back Alberta. And for those who don't know what Take Back Alberta is, it's the group that myself and a bunch of people, including Jarrad, have been running across this province in Alberta to try to educate people on how their system works and how they can get engaged. So, Jarrad, welcome to the show.
Good day. Good to be here.
Jarrad, why don't you share a little bit with our listeners a bit of who you are and kind of what you're about, and so that they can get to know you a bit, and then we'll go into the free-flowing conversation we love on this show.
Sounds good. I was born and raised in Milk River, Alberta, which is a community right next to community some people have heard of lately, Coutts. We're about 15 kilometers north of there, right by the Montana border. I grew up on a farm, cattle and grain. I have a twin brother. We're the oldest of 5 boys. And my mom had to wait a generation to get any girls. I've got 4 girls, 2 boys, myself. Got my twin brother has a bunch of kids too. And I'm a carpenter, own a couple rental properties, and we moved back to Milk River the November before all the fun stuff that happened in Coutts. And that's when I got connected with David and Take Back Alberta, is when we're thinking what's next, right? Because things weren't really done on the freedom front, in my opinion. Faith is a very important part of my life. We help in our local church here. My wife is quite gifted musically, and I even get to play guitar, or attempt to, and sing. So we volunteer with, I was reffing for basketball the other day. I don't know, just loving this community here. Love being back where I was born and raised. And my wife, she's not minding it either. It took me a few years to convince her to move down here out of the city. We were in Edmonton area for 20 years. And yeah, that's some other things.
So also you went to seminary, I believe, right? Or Bible school, and were heavily involved in building your faith at a young age as well.
Yeah, I had quite an interest in pursuing God's plan for my life and looking to discover that. And I went to Bible school in Red Deer for a couple of years. I was a youth pastor for a couple of years, and really enjoyed that. And then I dove into doing carpentry for about the last 20. So, and volunteered along the way, stayed involved in my local church, which has been great for relationships and yeah, faith is a pretty big focus in my life for sure.
So it's always been interesting to me how different people pursue their faith and learn about, their relationship with God, as we would say in the Christian side. What was it that changed your mind on God and got it to move from simply a belief system or an ideology to a faith and relationship?
I guess I remember my introduction to faith, just saying bedtime prayers with my parents, and they're talking about this Jesus. So I asked them about Jesus, and I just end up remembering, oh, you can invite him into your heart, basically, invite him to be in my life. So I remember praying that prayer when I was only 3 or 4 years old. But as I grew up as a teenager, it was actually my junior high years, I remember pursuing relationships with people. First of all, classmates, and seemed to let me down, the whole popularity thing, being insecure, whatever. And I felt like I was let down by those people relationships with classmates. I'm like, oh, that's okay. I have my youth group friends. And those relationships seemed to let me down. So I was like, oh, that's okay. I have my family. And one day, my mother, who's one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet, I remember really frustrating her and ticking her off. And I'm like, ugh. I'm feeling like I got nobody. And I realized then I'd been ignoring my relationship with Christ the whole time, and that he was my best friend. So I really dove into my relationship with Christ. And I remember thinking, if that's the only relationship I truly have, I'll be okay. And I decided not to be bitter at people or anything. But then I remember once I made that transition, just a confidence grew in me, and I actually became more likable of a person, and people actually started to like me. And I seemed like God blessed me with more relationships once I was able to get that one as a priority in my life. And yeah, so I just pursued reading my Bible and trying to involve God in the decisions in my life. And because I figured if he's the creator, he made me, he's going to have, he'll be able to put the plan together for my life better than I could come up with on my own. So, and yeah, I felt a calling maybe to ministry, or to have my life revolved around the good news of what Christ did on the cross. And so I've never been totally sure how that'll totally take shape, but yeah, I guess kingdom life, they call it. Just that's what I've been interested in as a priority. And I've done carpentry and been raising kids. And
well, carpentry is probably a good choice if you're following Jesus, because obviously he was a carpenter as well. But
yeah.
What I'm always interested in this, because you've pursued a life of faith pretty much your whole life, as you described. When you were 3 to 4 years old, you accepted Jesus, but then you realized that you wanted to make that a priority in junior high. But as we've moved through our lives, and you and I are similar ages, although you're a little bit older than me, the world has changed. The perspective on the church has changed. The perspective on Christians has changed. The perspective on people who even have a religion at all has changed. And maybe describe what that was like for you, watching that happen while you're growing up in that. Now, for context, I would say I was raised very Christian, a pastor for a father and a homeschool facilitator for a mother. And what I found was there was very much an understanding in my family that we were going to be in the world, but not of the world. That they're outside of Christianity. There was, let's call it, an inability to understand what's important to a degree, because Christ taught us sacrifice. Christ taught us grace, mercy, and those are not things that we really see in let's call it the outside world nearly as much, although they do exist, obviously. And I believe that there is grace outside of just like Orthodox Christianity. But what have you noticed about how the world has changed? And was that kind of your experience?
I guess I noticed that the world tends to present a certain perspective, a certain narrative. Growing up as a son of a farmer, I remember even Paul Harvey as a young boy, and now you know the rest of the story. I remember realizing there's always two sides of the story. So to me, it's always been interesting to view the world from other people's perspective and lens. And that keeps me from getting a little too critical, because I guess it's called empathy. My mother, she's one of the most empathetic people I've ever met. So I understand why people believe what they believe. I've been in the biology class where you hear, the narrative of evolution, right? But I also grew up hearing science that's found in scripture as well, right? So I could understand why people believe what they believe. And but I also remember my faith, even as a teenager, diving into like the science in the Bible, different theological reasoning for things. And to me, my faith has grown over the years. And so there's always been people that don't necessarily see eye to eye with me. And I've had a lot of empathy about that. So over the years, I guess I've always been aware of, I haven't necessarily noticed people becoming more opposed to faith. I think I've noticed just in these last few years, people are becoming more aware of what's been going on behind the scenes. Like Paul Harvey said, the rest of the story, like politically, that's what I like about Take Back Alberta. They're teaching people what's going on, how politics actually work. So I guess I've always been empathetic about the different perspectives and realize what society as a whole believes. And sometimes you can feel kind of alone in your faith, but there's stories in the Bible where, whole cities, there's only 8 righteous people found, or not even, right? Or 8 people that believe found. And there's a lot of messed up stuff going on. And in comparison to that, I'm not that negative about where our world's at, I guess I could say. And I think that might partially answer what you're asking.
It's a great perspective.
I guess what I'm thinking... Oh, go ahead, Zach. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead, David.
I guess all I'm trying to get at is not even a sense of loneliness, but a sense of how faith presents itself as a kind of guard against groupthink. I know that sounds really weird because a lot of people see faith as a form of groupthink, but let's get the other side of the story. A lot of people that are in the freedom movement are also people of faith. Now, not all of them are Christians, but a lot of them have a strong belief in God, and that has shaped the movement in a big way. Now, our enemies, our opponents, I wouldn't call them our enemies, but our opponents, the people that are saying that what we're doing and the way that we're going about it is wrong, they claim that's because we don't believe in the science. What do you think it is that sets people of faith apart so that they were able to look at this issue, let's call it, which has proven itself to be wrong? The vaccine has proven to be neither safe or effective, and yet people were forcing it on us, and yet a lot of people of faith stood up against that. What do you think it was in your faith that helped you to do that?
I think one of the guiding principles in faith from a Christian worldview is the freedom, even the freedom of choice. There's a scripture in the Old Testament even that says, God, behold, I stand before you. You can choose life, blessings and cursing, or you can choose death. You can choose blessing or you can choose cursing. And so there's a principle of freedom of choice, even if it leads to destruction or self-harm. You're allowed to choose that. But Jesus came so that we could have life and life to the full. And Satan is around to steal, kill, and destroy. So even if there's this principle that Christ came to set us free, right? So when freedom of choice is removed, and that's what I saw early on and I think what a lot of people of faith saw early on was the freedom of choice was being eroded and being threatened. And that's fundamental even for faith. And I think that's why a lot of Christians had red flags about what was going on. Now, there's plenty of Christians that there's scriptures in Romans that say, submit to your authorities, and then you can get into the debate, well, should you be submitted to Adolf Hitler? And I looked at those scriptures in Romans and realized when there's good authority, things go well for you, right? So you don't have to submit to things that are wrong or morally reprehensible, right? And go along to get along. So, and also people of faith, I'm realizing, and what Take Back Alberta is all about, we're supposed to steward what we have. Adam and Eve were supposed to take care of the garden. Abraham, the father of faith, and a guy who walked in relationship with God, he had all types of blessing, and God loved to give to the heroes of the Bible all types of things, but it was up to them to steward them well. And so I think we have freedom right now, and if we don't do our part as citizens or as people of faith to steward it and to love our neighbors, and sometimes love means taking a stand that might be uncomfortable, but we're supposed to also do it in love. And the one thing I could see going wrong is if people are taking a stand, but it's out of fear or anger, right? There's a righteous anger, but we should be able to love the people who would think of us as enemies. And that's important.
Well, that's the hardest thing, right? That's at least for me, that's been a great difficulty because, I guess I wouldn't call it an angry personality, but perhaps I have a propensity towards anger and to pushing myself to like do things through being upset with something that I see as wrong or unjust. But I agree with you. That is not the attitude that we should be approaching. Jesus is quite clear. We have to love our enemies. So we can't really hate them, even though, and I will say this, I have hated my enemies many times, and even in this last year and a half. And it's something you and I've talked about that I'm working on is following a more loving path while trying to do what I see as the most loving thing, which is try to preserve our democracy from this attack that we're experiencing. So what are some ways that you try to love your enemies? Because I think that's a great thing to reflect on.
I guess just practically, a soft answer turns away wrath. I like to get to know people. Like for me, it's quite enjoyable to actually meet people when you meet someone in person versus their persona on Facebook in a Facebook argument, or I think, and people get to know who you really are. I really enjoy that. Sorry, what was the question?
No, but basically, how have you in your life, let's call it turn the other cheek? Like when your enemies have come at you, how do you stop yourself from getting angry and building my tribe, their tribe, and love?
I guess it's that empathy thing we were talking about before. I learned sitting in a store at the local park here, writing on stone, one of my first jobs. I'd make it my point to say hi to everybody who walked through the door and smile at them, right? And it was kind of hard at first because some people would just stay real. They'd keep a frown on and they'd grunt or not even acknowledge you. And so I had to choose not to take it personally. And I realized about the second or third time that same person came in the store on that weekend, they would start to smile. And in fact, they would be friendly. And so I start to realize it wasn't necessarily me that they hated or they were angry about, is they weren't used to, they probably assumed that I didn't necessarily like them at first. They probably had a rough day or needed to be on a holiday or weren't used to people that actually loved them or cared about them. So I guess my mom was really excellent as a kid, explaining when I'd have hurt feelings about how I was treated, just imagining things from their perspective. And so it helped me not to get too judgmental about people's actions or attitudes towards me. And so that's kind of helped me, as I realized, hey, if they actually got to know me, they'd realize, hey, I like them. We'd probably end up friends if they actually got to know me and got past some assumptions about me. So I've had a few enemies that turn into friends, and I sincerely enjoy those relationships to this day. I even remember in Bible school, one of the guys that kind of clashed with me and automatically didn't like me. He ended up being the guy I kept in the most contact with through the years. He ended up being a friend. And I saw that when I've encountered an enemy, or when the word enemy comes and someone pops in your head, that's if you start praying for that person and blessing them. I've seen them turn into actual friends over time. So for me, it's a little bit of one of my favorite scriptures I learned was, let love and faithfulness guide you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you'll win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. So if I have a loving life and I'm faithful to people, then I'm pretty expectant that my enemies end up usually turning into friends.
I'm curious. Take Back Alberta is a unique organization, as far as I can tell, in the sense that I don't know any other organization whose goal is to run around and teach a demographic of people how their political system works. And because there's not a lot of organizations doing that, it's a bit of a funny mandate because it's unique. I know exactly how David got involved in that because, David's background is politics, and that is a very clear path, and that makes sense. But what was it about Take Back Alberta that caught your eye, and what motivated you to get involved in the organization and teach the people around you how they can take control of their lives through understanding how the political system around them works?
Well, I've been aware for quite a while. We do have the internet at our fingertips, but I've been aware for quite a while of some of the crazy things going on in our world, the corruption in politics, even good people being tempted to go to the dark side, and they end up talking one way and acting a different way when they get pressured. So the thing I liked about Take Back Alberta, it wasn't just a bunch of people complaining about what was going on. There was a chance, an opportunity for action and, I guess, stewardship. Our democracy is supposed to be run by the people. And we have more than a democracy because it's also based on moral laws. It's not just mob rule. So what I knew that we were going to have another flu season coming in the fall. Take Back Alberta had a plan for that fall, right? We were working on making sure a freedom-minded premier was elected, someone that valued people's choice, the same kind of values that were highlighted in the Nuremberg Code. People shouldn't have to be a part of a medical experiment if they didn't want to. And by every definition, what people were being faced with was experimental treatments, mRNA technology for existing, or for the virus we were facing. So what attracted me to it was David had set up some practical steps, and we could mobilize people and do what politics is supposed to be about. The grassroots people, the regular good people of Alberta, the type of people I was raised with, instead of complaining, we could actually help shape our society. for the good of everybody, not just to get my way. And if we got involved, it would be the loving thing, to help out my kids and your kids, right? So that's what I liked about Take Back Alberta was it wasn't a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. It was a next week plan, this fall plan, and practical action instead of just complaining or getting worried or talking about, how sick and cruel the world is, which I've heard plenty of, right?
Yeah, it's really amazing how action oriented it is, and that's really you're not going to get anything done without kinetic force, and kinetic force is just simply action. Action has to be in place if you're going to move the needle. And in Alberta, we've seen a very big needle move. We've seen a premier switch, and that's really, really cool. So, what would you say? So, the first priority of the organization is to equip people with an understanding, right? And that's great because you're not trying to make decisions for them. All you're trying to do is understand the power that they automatically hold by being a citizen of this country. But what would you say you hope comes next for Alberta through equipping those people with understanding how they can affect change? What is, we've seen a premier go. Okay, that's great. We've seen a new premier be put in. That's amazing. We like this new premier. She likes freedom. That's a really great step forward. What is next?
Well, the immediate next practical step we're working on is helping ensure things don't get passed back to our local socialist style leadership. So we've had the NDP, and we had a taste of that, what their leadership was like a few years ago. And so that's the immediate next step, because we have a current freedom-minded premier, which I think it almost feels like a miracle that it's happened, right? And but obviously her job is soon up to be challenged by the different political parties. And the main opposition is a fairly far left perspective, and a lot of their policies would be the type of things that, in my opinion, would put the freedoms we were talking about earlier, the value of freedom, would put some of those things in jeopardy. And I think it's some of the ideology is fundamentally flawed. It's kind of about taking redistributing wealth, or taking from this group of people to give to others, when I think it's flawed because you're supposed to share out of the motivation of your heart. You're supposed to share out of love. And I think when the government has to, try and decide what's fair and redistribute things, then it demotivates people. We all learned about the pitfalls of socialism and communism. So the immediate next step is to be involved and get friends and family to the polls, teach people about what's at stake for freedom, and another 4 years of socialism in Alberta. Alberta seems to me like a bastion of freedom right now in this world and prosperity. And it wouldn't take too much for that to be reversed with some of the policies that have been implemented in the past by that party, and what they would want to do, how they want to partner with our our prime minister.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Watching this from the outside, like in the sense of knowing what we know now at Take Back Alberta and the work that we're doing. We've got a lot done, but we know that all of that would basically not have a lot of meaning if 5 months from now the NDP were going to get in. And I like what you said is redistribution, but I like to think of it as the politics of envy. It's a politics that says, oh, another person is doing better than me. That's not fair. it's like a kid, right, who sees their sibling get something that they didn't get, and they immediately become upset, or like a anyone who sits in a victim mentality, and they push this victim mentality so much. This idea that, you know, that you are if you are a person who has been wronged in some way, then you should be seeking retribution. You should be punishing others for wronging you, and it's constantly telling people that they're victims and that there's something wrong with society, which I think we can all agree there's lots wrong with society. I don't think anyone's sitting here saying everything's fair or perfect and that nobody has been hurt and there's been no victims. But I don't think the answer for any of us is to say, well, I'm the victim. And I liked what you said about Christianity, because a lot of Christians that I've talked to can also feel like victims. They can feel like, oh, the world is persecuting me. But you're like, no, I think that if a lot of these people met me, they would like me and we would become friends, right? Your mentality is not a victim mentality. And this the fear that I have is that if all we do is teach people that they're victims, what are they going to become? Victims. And worse, I think worse than that even, is what do victims tend to become? There's an old saying, the victim becomes the victimizer. Right. And I worry about that. I worry that that if we keep teaching people that they've been wronged, everything's bad, everything's terrible, where does that leave people? They need some way out of that. So I couldn't agree with you more. We have to. It's really is a. I wouldn't call it a spiritual battle because it's political and there are separations between those two things. But I would call it a spiritual battle in the sense that we're fighting an ideology that hurts people more than it helps them. Trapping someone in an idea that they're a victim, or an idea that they're poor, or that they're part of some oppressed group, teaching them that, even if it's true, and there are times where it is true, it doesn't make them better. It doesn't help them grow. Yeah, it disempowers.
Yeah. And I think that's where my faith comes in too, is because there's a truth that I choose to believe. Like, I have faith that we're more than conquerors through Christ Jesus, who gives us strength. Whereas the world would, want you to embrace a victim mentality, embrace an identity where there's nothing you can do. You need to just either take, from someone else, or curl up in a ball and give up. And I think that's the thing that was encouraging about Take Back Alberta as well, is, hey, you can steward things, you can be involved. You don't have to believe that you're powerless, because if you believe it, you will be powerless.
Yeah. I think, David, you said something really, really important, because we can agree that there are actual victims. But I want to re-highlight and re-flesh out what you said, because it's super, super, super important. Even if there are victims, treating people as victims isn't helping them. So let's talk about redistribution. So let's say there is, who would we consider a victim in our society? Someone who is addicted. I guess the easiest example is someone who's addicted to drugs and on the street. Okay, so let's say we institute universal basic income. Now that person, we say, you are a victim. You have earned below a certain threshold. Therefore, you're going to get whatever it is, $800 every 2 weeks, $1,500 every 2 weeks, whatever. It doesn't really matter. What does that lesson teach them? What does that situation incentivize that person to do? Well, if I were in that situation, I would have even less. When I started receiving that money, I would have even less reason than before to dig myself out of the hole that I'm in. And so I think that's a really important point. The redistribution and the pushing of the victim mentality doesn't help the people who need our help. There has to be a different solution. And I think we can't glaze over that. And I think that is, on a base level, why that policy, in my opinion, is just so incredibly poor and unhelpful.
Yeah, and I think like going back to what Jarrad was saying too about being conquerors, like I think we've lost in this scientific world, let's call it a scientific world. It's somehow got in people's heads that we know everything. That like everything that humans have figured out everything out, and we kind of know where we come from, where we're going.
Trust the science.
Trust the science, right? and in my and I've ranted about this before, but trusting science is the opposite of science. It's not real. Like you can't trust science. Science is doubt. Science is testing things to see if they're true over and over again. But besides that point, we don't know almost anything. We're tiny little humans on a rock, right? Circling a ball of fire as far as we understand. And we can't even sense as many things as a cat or a dog. A dog has a better sense of smell. They have a higher spectrum of smell than we do. There is so much going on that we have no comprehension of, that we don't even think about. And our little finite minds have become so egotistical as to think we can control everything. And if you just give us the money and the power, we'll take care of everybody. Well, it's never worked. It has never worked in all of human history that humans have been able to make a perfect utopian society. And it's never going to work because humans are fundamentally selfish. And if we try to create an equal playing field where everyone is the same, humans aren't going to be happy in that. They're just not. That's not how we're wired. And I think the arrogance of the modern world to say, well, we know everything, we're 100% right, is the arrogance of ideology, I call it. The arrogance of saying my system of thought is 100% correct, and anyone who disagrees with me is bad. Now, a lot of people struggle with that because they'll say, well, Christians say that their system of thought is correct. Well, really, we're not saying a system of thought is correct. I don't think that's what Christians are saying. I think all they're saying is, I'm a sinner in need of a savior, and I have a relationship with God that allows me to know that I'm forgiven and to strive to be better like him, not to be better because I'm better. Now, that's my understanding of Christianity. Other people have different ones. But I think when we're talking about fighting the NDP, it's not just other people that we don't like or that we don't want to be in power. And like people like Jarrad and I, we're not getting power from doing Take Back Alberta. We're literally just helping people make sure that the powerful don't oppress them. But that's democracy. That's why it was invented. That's why humanity came up with the idea of democracy, was because they realized, and I believe they realized this through what they call the Western canon, which is founded on the Bible. And they realized that power is bad, that giving humans power doesn't work well. And so we need to limit their power. And that was the purpose of democracy. But what I see happening on the left is they just want more and more power over our lives. They want to take our freedom away because they believe they know what's good for us better than we do.
I think why socialism or communism can be so flawed is it's counting on the morality of the powerful. So someone a long time ago said, hey, what's the most godly form of government? Is it a monarchy? Is it a democracy? Is it, list the different types of leadership in a country. And none of them necessarily. But a monarchy, a bad king can screw up a whole country a lot easier than a couple bad people in a democracy. At least with a democracy, you have to have messed up morality of a lot more people, to to have a bad situation for the people. So if you have a great king, then monarchies are great, right? If you have the nice thing about democracy or our system, it factors in there's checks and balances for other corrupt people so that they can be dealt with or taken out. The scary thing about communism is you're counting on a good guy being in charge. And what if the good guy decides not to be not so good next month after he's got the reins of power? So I think it's a lot more realistic worldview. And I guess the biblical worldview factors in the immorality or the temptation that man has towards evil, and factors in human nature, right?
Yeah, well, if communism counts on the morality of the powerful and power corrupts, you're really rolling the dice on your luck there.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is more obvious to almost anyone than that power corrupts, right? Like, I know that at times where I've had power, I have felt its corrupting influence on myself, right? Because I think that power gives us, and this is just me theorizing here, spitballing, but I think that power gives you an undue sense of your own value. Because really, power is given by other people, always, right? Whether they know it or not. When someone has power, it's because other people say, we're giving this to you. Whether they say it or not, that's how it works. And so when someone gives you decision-making power, let's say, you might begin to think that the reason they've given it to you is because you're better than everybody else. And that is immediately going to cause you all kinds of grief. But if instead you do what was kind of been the tradition that's been passed down to us, which is a servant leader, being, saying, okay, no, I've got to be a public servant, or in the words of Christ, you must be servant of all. If that's how you approach leadership, you have a chance of not being corrupted. But I think that if you become a leader because you genuinely think you're better than other people, or that it's different to think that you have something to offer that others don't have. That's a different kind of leadership, because everybody has something to offer. But if we're not focused on the fact that power itself is a very dangerous and highly volatile thing, then we're not paying attention to human history.
Yeah. And I realized people can start out with the right motives and they can be twisted without even realizing. Like realizing that, I guess Jordan Peterson was talking about it, realizing that you could be statistically, if you were in World War II Germany, you would have ended up being one of the bad guys. But everyone assumes that they would have been Schindler, right? Saving people. But statistically, realizing that you have the potential to be evil, to be immoral, or to hurt people can help you realizing that you're not above that, that humility, right? Realizing that, hey, or empathy, realizing I could be really twisted just like that person seems to be twisted if I'm not careful, right? Even as a kid, realizing that Ted Bundy, he became a serial killer, but it all started just finding a porno magazine in the ditch, right? And it eventually led him to other things. So just realizing that having that humility that you could be messed up can be a safeguard in getting messed up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have to know your own darkness, don't you? I love the Solzhenitsyn line. The line between good and evil runs down the heart of every man. I think there is almost an infinite amount of wisdom in just those few words, because we are all capable of terrible things. And I think to a certain extent, that means we do have to be empathetic to people who we feel like are being terrible, even our political leaders, because, who is to say that us in the same situation wouldn't have behaved the same way? We can't know because we haven't been there. It doesn't make what they're doing right, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't metaphorically smoke them for what they're doing, smoke them out of their position, remove them from their political power. But I think going back to the beginning of the conversation, it's important to not let yourself hate those people, because hate will blind you and it'll make you make mistakes and it will turn you into your own monster. And you don't want that.
Yeah. It is profound, that servant leadership principle, that loving your enemies principle. Because the hate has to stop at some point. You got to draw the line in the sand, because revenge is a terrible thing, because you get revenge and someone's going to, well, my last name is McCoy. And that's one of the examples of stupid feuds, is the Hatfields and McCoys. It started out over a pig and people died.
A lot of people for a lot of years died, right?
God, we can be so dumb sometimes.
Yeah.
And God knows that, and he still loves us. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I want to ask you a more personal question before we kind of get to the end of this and wrap this up. Not a lot of people these days. Sorry, I want to preface this with, like, when you opened the conversation with a little bit of background about yourself, the thing that popped into my head is, you know how there's the American dream? Well, you must be the Alberta dream. You know, you're a carpenter, you've got a family, you got a couple rental properties. Like, Alberta, because I'm an Ontario kid, is this like shining hope in Canada that we can't lose. That, you know, if in Alberta, you can still work hard at a job and get yourself ahead and have a family. But on that family note, what made you and your wife decide to have 6 children in an age where a lot of people are choosing not to have children at all, or to have a small amount of children? Why did you approach that differently?
Well, besides the scripture, that one of the early ones that said, go forth and multiply. Like, we always joke around and say, hey, it's not multiplication unless you have 4 kids, right? And 2 times 2. But that aside, I grew up in a family of 5, with 5 boys. I enjoyed it. I don't think my parents regretted having any of us. My wife, she grew up with lots of siblings. And when we were dating, we said, 3 to 5 kids, right? So we talked about that a long time before. We also noticed we had friends that really celebrated their kids. Like, we had some friends that looked at their kids like they were a burden. And I saw those kids grow up with a lot of issues and needing medications. But I remember the parents telling me right in front of their kids how they didn't really plan on having them. And so they just probably had this sense of rejection, these kids, right from early on. And where I saw this other family, that this couple was more excited to go to Hawaii with their kids. They were so jacked about this family holiday they're going to do because they were taking their kids. Where a lot of parents, they're excited to get away from their kids, and they'll be talking about that in front of their kids. And I just saw the love and how those kids flourished when they knew that they were cherished and wanted. And I also realized, when I'm 90 years old, I'm not going to look back and wish I had a nicer truck when I was 40. You know, I wish I'd have had a brand new Chevy back in 2022. But I will appreciate, kids and grandkids coming to visit me when I'm 90. If you look at big picture, and this is something I've thought about too, right? Big picture, biblical worldview. Children are actually a way God blesses people, right? And it was actually a sign of wealth, especially in in agricultural societies, right? And as technology advances, I think it's a little bit of a lie to think of kids as a burden. I've also seen friends, the pastor Candace grew up, that's my wife. They had 12 kids. And it seemed like God helped that dad provide for those kids quite well. I've seen big families where that love God and their kids don't seem to go without. There's a principle in the Bible of trusting in God and God being your provider. And I've leaned into that. And my kids have always been fed well. One thing I worry about is, will I have enough love to go around? And when I had more kids, it seemed like my heart grew. It didn't seem like I had to chop up the love and share it with more kids. And there's these moments where you just look at your kid and you feel just this amazing love. And each one's like a unique relationship, and there's a unique dynamic you have with them. And so it can be addictive. Be careful. You know?
Once you get one, you get hooked.
Yeah. And 4 kids isn't 4 times as hard because they start having a relationship with each other and entertaining each other. And our oldest kids actually, with our 6th kid, we asked our oldest kids what they thought about having another sibling, and they volunteered to do meals for a year for mom to help her out. And the 6th kid was actually one of the best pregnancy experiences for my wife, and had one of the best recoveries. And she's a gorgeous woman. Having 6 kids hasn't affected her beauty at all. In fact, it's she's extra beautiful when she's carrying my kids. And I don't know, it's just feels like a blessing having kids. So if I have more, then the vehicle situation gets complicated. But
you're at vehicle capacity, yeah.
Well, at this point, some of them will start growing up and not needing you to drive them around anymore, I would think.
Yeah, the oldest is 15 now, so
yeah. Soon they'll start graduating from the need for you to get them around. Well, Jarrad, thank you for coming on. I know you got to get to work. We have more podcasts to do today, but I just, before we close, I just want to thank you for your sincere heart, for God, for Alberta, for your family, and for everything that you've done for this province, for taking, you haven't just liked the actionable steps that Take Back Alberta has, you've taken those actionable steps. So thank you for everything you're doing for your province, for your family, and I know most importantly for you, that thank you for what you're doing for God, because I know that sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed. Thank
you for the great visit. And I appreciate all that you guys are doing, getting the Canadian story out there. Looking forward to great things ahead. And like you said, it's all for naught if we don't stay involved, right? And so thank you for creating opportunities for us to take action and be involved in the process like we were supposed to be.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's the CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.